welcome you here tonight. I'm Michelle Howard. I'm the director of our library here. It's my second day, yay! So really cool that I get to be here for this. So tonight we're gonna have a civil discussion. I just want to say a big thank you to Casey Cowell and his company, Boomerang Catapult, because they have funded our little library out here, and who just really brought this idea to us, and we got to run with it. So a big thank you to them. And Emily, who's in the back, who works for Boomerang, she's part of it, and she has to leave in a little bit. But before I say much else, I want to introduce our moderator/speakers. One is John DiGiacomo. He's a local attorney in town, and I think has an undergraduate degree in philosophy. And then our other moderator speaker is Kimberly Vinchetto, and she, sorry about that, and she writes books. She's an author, and all the main character in the book the main character fights wildlife crime. So from a fiction perspective, but we know the research she does is really going to bring a lot to our conversation. And just to let you know, we have lots of other things going on in the library, and our next topic in November will be individual freedom. So that'll be a really great discussion. So without further ado, let's give them a round of applause.
Well, thank you for being here. My name is John DiGiacomo, and I'll do kind of a brief introduction of who I am, what this is, and we'll kind of get started. I am an attorney. Don't hold that against me. I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy, which means that I'm dangerous enough to sound smart in a room of lay people, but really stupid enough to sound terrible in a room full of philosophers. So if you hear me misstate something, by all means jump in tonight, because I'm not as well versed as I should be. The topic for tonight is what kind of rights should we extend to non-human animals? And it's really a topic that arose out of discussions between a few of us who are interested in the subject, and so we thought it might be interesting to present the viewpoints and the arguments on all sides of this issue, and that's really what Consider This is. It is a discussion, a facilitated discussion that's intended to be active, to get the audience involved, to ask questions, to make arguments, but it is facilitated. This is not a debate, it's really just a presentation of different sides of an issue. And so this issue is kind of interesting because it's not one that I know well, but it's one that I'm very interested in. And so I'm excited to kind of explore the subject with you and with our guest as well, as much as I am excited to sit up here and talk about it. So let's get started. Kimberly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I had a wonderful introduction. I'm an author, and this is really my life's passion, is wildlife and animals. So animal rights is a part of that. I was on the board of the local Humane Society, chairman of the Humane Society a few years back, and used to publish a magazine that was a nature and wildlife magazine before the recession. Which leads up in another direction. But yeah, I'm just honored to be here and have lots of my own very strong opinions about this subject.
Great. And you'll see tonight that I don't actually have very strong opinions. Unfortunately, we were unable to find somebody who is very passionate about the species, what I would call the specious argument, meaning that we should not extend rights to non-human animals. Maybe there's somebody in the audience who's interested in that argument. I think I'm supposed to be the person that makes it, so though I'm not particularly passionate about it, we'll see tonight. So let's kind of get started with this first question. Kimberly, why do you think that we should, or should we, extend rights to non-human animals?
Wow, that's the whole hour-and-a-half conversation tonight, so where do we start on that? So John and I talked on the phone a little bit about where we wanted to go with this conversation and where we want to start, and that's really the bottom line, isn't it? Should we or shouldn't we? Do they have rights? Do they have, what's the definition of rights? What are we affording these animals? Is it a legal right? Is it a right to be alive as we live and breathe and have certain rights, to not be murdered, to follow the same or be under the same protection of the law? Is it a right of animal to animal? If we accept that we came from the wild kingdom ourselves, then what are the laws of the jungle? Is that what we're talking about? So do they have rights? That's a very complicated question. What I don't like is the premise when we call them they.
Sure.
Right? Because I believe we're animals as well, and in some ways we might be considering ourselves more sophisticated animals, but are we?
And I think that was a very loaded question. But I think the reason why I'm asking it the way that I am is I got into the car tonight. Actually, before I got into the car, I walked to my closet upstairs, and I have a pair of $400 boots built on my wife, because that's like the only thing I splurge on boots. They're leather, and they're from Allen Edmonds. And I thought to myself, should I put these on? Is there someone in the crowd tonight that's going to be upset with the fact that I'm putting on leather boots? And I got into my car, and I drive a SUV because I have a 3-year-old and another kid on the way. And I thought to myself, is that really the choice that I should have made? Because maybe there was a less costly choice that I could have made if I was considering non-human animals in the equation of whether I should buy this car. And then I got onto the road, and I started driving down 8th Street, and I started thinking, well, 8th Street looks nice. That's kind of interesting. And then I thought, well, could we maybe have made alternative design decisions on 8th Street that would have considered non-human animals in a better way? And then I started thinking, wow, this is really crazy. I have some problems.
They're going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I'm going down the rabbit hole. So I started to think to myself, well, this is the problem, right? Isn't it? That it's difficult in some ways to draw that line to determine when we should start to consider the rights of non-human animals or whether they should have rights, because there are a number of situations in which we can really we kind of have to force ourselves to consider them.
I mean, there are wildlife corridors in different
There
parts
are,
of the
yeah,
world where
absolutely.
Highways and that have actually been designed specifically to have wildlife corridors where the wildlife can move over the highway. Generally, they're put into tunnels and things like that where we know there's specific migration routes and things like that. So that has been done. But certainly on 8th Street, you could hit a squirrel there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think the
Is
interesting
it a
question
wildlife
is,
corridor? Is that what's important?
yes.
I had a question when I was thinking about your shoes and you guys are talking. Does it make a difference between those that serve a job, like making shoes or providing food, and those that are wild? Do you think of that? Do you think of that in your equation of rights or for your books?
Well, I think that there certainly is a class of animals that we consider lesser than, right? We treat our dogs and cats very differently than we think in terms of livestock animals, cows and pigs, and those which we eat are in a different class. We think in terms of emotions that are associated with our dog and our cat, which is tied to our emotions and how we feel about them. All of that's part of it. But when you ask the question, how did you phrase it exactly?
Like animals that kind of serve a purpose versus like an elephant in the wild. Like to me, like, do you feel like there's different rights there?
Right. I think that's part of the cultural question, because certainly those animals have value in the big picture, a part of an ecosystem, right? And that's what's hardest for us as humans to see is the really, really big picture. If we destroy an apex predator, we remove an apex predator from an environment, it changes the environment dramatically. And we've seen these cascade effects of that. So does that predator have intrinsic value in of itself? Should we have tigers in the world? Well, we should if we value that ecosystem to stay intact in the way that it is right now. So we can talk about this big picture. We live on essentially the only Goldilocks planet that we know exists in the universe, right? And are we systematically destroying it by changing it to suit our needs for today? And will we regret that? So that's one answer to the question. Or do we want to eliminate tigers because they're scary and they could eat us? That's really been the norm from here. Yes?
But in that case, Fred, it's interesting you phrased it in terms of what we should think about. And the question I have is, are we concerned really about absolute animal rights, or are we concerned as humans about doing the morally virtuous thing? And are they the same? Because if the concern is animal rights, then maybe we have to go deeper into making sure that all rights of all the animals are protected all the time. We have to have a way to do it. The flip side of that, and what you were saying, is that really everything we do has impact on the ecosystem. And things that we choose not to do have impact. So the fact that we're humans here evolving means we're going to have impact. So then the question becomes, is it animal rights that we're concerned with, which could be good, that's fine. Or is it really that we're trying to figure out what is the virtuous approach for us to reconcile our own human perspective existence on the planet?
I think that's really the big, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, you don't like it when you say they as if they're separate, but then everything is we, as if we decide it all. I think the idea of what makes us feel good about the person and being that we are and how we respect the animals is not how we are in the US is different than how you are. If you go global, if you're going bigger on how you look at animals, who are we to think we can make this decision? So, I do think it's a lot more individual to, are you just respectful of living things?
Right,
And not act like we're so in control of it, and now you're not doing it right, because I'm doing this, or, it's the respect for living all the way around you that try to separate the human from the thing.
Yeah, you're talking about a moral obligation, the respect for the living, versus, for me, I found that when I'm trying to convince someone that they tend to be more open to the idea when I can take that conversation all the way to what it does for other humans, right? If we destroy the ecosystem, if we destroy the planet while we're at it, then we're destroying human life on the planet. We're going to regret it one day when a lot of these animals are gone, and then the animals, quote, below them are gone, and below them the plant life is now destroyed. And we're not going to have a way to eat anymore because our population has exploded and we wake up one day, right? So that's a whole different argument, that is it just a moral issue? How should we treat animals? Do they have equal rights as we do?
Yeah, and I think, Casey, that's what you were getting at, which is
Right.
that.
You can go down that path and say, well, what about plants? Because plants could be evolving into something vastly more intelligent and virtuous than human mankind. And so, but then I think if you go down that path very far, you can't do anything. So, or I'm not sure.
Well, that's really the interesting question.
That's where
Is
you
that
start to get stymied.
the counterexample that I always find compelling is if animals truly have rights, can chimpanzees vote? Because as soon as we start recognizing rights, we really have to recognize rights.
Japan's has awarded dolphins first.
Yeah, so
Chimpanzees recently in the United States as well.
I think it's helpful to talk a little bit about how philosophers categorize these types of things. So, or at least the way that I see them. And Jordan, you can jump in if I do this incorrectly. Jordan was my philosophy professor in college. So
Don't hold that against me.
Yeah. Philosophers look at these in a number of ways. The first would be the religious worldview. So the religious worldview would be potentially animal. What we talked about yesterday. Maybe you could state it better than I can.
I don't know how you can state it.
Okay.
I had just said a lot of this stems from one line in Genesis that has been translated multiple ways throughout time as to whether we are considered the stewards of the animals and the land, or whether this is our dominion as humans. And those are two very different ways of looking at it. So and that's been an argument throughout thousands, over the last thousands of years.
I think a good metaphysical way to look at the rights of animals versus the rights of humans is that humans have rationality, they have control over the universe, like we're control over our areas, we're able to put ideas together, we're able to tame nature, whether it be animals build skyscrapers hundreds of stories high or build marvelous structures. We're able to control nature to our own vision, where animals don't have that ability. With that cognizance, we have the ability to either do poorly with our vision or do as well as we want. And part of those extrinsic things that will happen is that we treat it poorly, as treating animals poorly or abusing the crops that we have, that vision falls apart. It's on our case to make everything more efficient and more, in a more efficient manner.
I think ants are winning in terms of biomass. And they also do major restructuring and reshaping of the world around them, seemingly without intelligence or strict rationality. And I also see in the very long view that maybe intelligence is not a strength or an adaptation that will lead to survival. So I wonder if we aren't valuing intelligence and rationality without maybe taking a critical look at it.
I didn't realize ants build buildings hundreds of floors high.
Well, they go down quite far to the ground, and they do have very complex structures, and you can point to other bees who have sophisticated communication methods and sophisticated
But they don't
building.
control us, we control them. We are masters of the world right now.
I think to his point, that's essentially his point, right? That we're not seeing ants, we're not afraid of them right now, are we? We're not. Are they at the top of the
Well, there's
pyramid here, or are
a
we?
particular breed, and I've just started, I've thought about insects and how they're winning, certain species of insects are winning the biomass competition. There's a particular ant from South America that has spread to several continents and is forming super colonies and is beating all the other ants. And I think it bears a serious look at whether
Is that the Weaver ant?
it's the
You mean by biomass?
the weight of all the living members of the species.
I think one of
So
the,
compare it.
I guess I want to push back a little bit against this idea that we control.
I think a really good way to push back against the idea that rationality is the basis for rights is that we know that certain humans don't have rationality. So if we
It's a sliding scale.
Right. If we have, well, we can imagine a world in which we can imagine a world in which we have, well, we do have a world in which we have individuals who are born with cognitive disabilities, the inability to speak, and these are all indicators of rationality. So if we choose rationality to be the kind of locus of where we extend rights, then ultimately there's a certain set of the population that we can now eat, which just seems like a poor outcome.
Right.
So it is somewhat compelling that rationality, at least to me, that rationality might not be the point at which we can make that decision. But yeah, go ahead.
Rationality is defined as being able to take in data through your senses, sight, sound, feel, and hearing, or taste, sorry. And that you're able to put that data together and make conclusions and make choices off of that. By saying you reject rationality means that you're rejecting the universe, you're rejecting that ability to put that stuff together. Are you saying that by rejecting rationality by saying that you're rejecting rationality, you're turning the whole world on its side, saying that anything can go? What is objective?
I don't think I'm saying I reject rationality as a principle. What I think I'm saying is that is the basis for whether or not we should extend non-human animals' rights. I think rationality is a tough sell because there are all these
There are several
compelling.
animals that we have definitely attributed rational thought to.
Yeah, well,
You know,
right, that too.
There's certainly evidence that there's rational thought among quite a few animals.
Well, for example, like dogs can count. We have some indication that dogs have they perform mental calculus. And you had some really good ones yesterday. I can't remember.
Well, they certainly can problem solve.
Yeah, they can use tools.
Use tools, yeah. So where do we draw the line when we're talking about, I think that's the conversation, right? What are the parameters in which we decide these animals don't have rights, but these animals do, or these humans do, but no other animals? And what defines an animal? Because most of us can mostly accept the premise that we're also animals.
Yes.
Maybe if you could explain to me what because when I think of animals' rights, they have the right to be free and have their own purpose. They're sentient beings that feel pain. They have family groups. We're talking livestock, all animals, all beings, all sentient beings. So when you talk about my rights and then the rights of a cow, I need to understand how. I mean, they want to have their purpose in their life and fulfill their lives here on earth. So I don't know what we're talking about as far as defining my rights and the rights of another sentient being who happens to be non-human.
I don't think we're trying to come to a conclusion about that tonight, but I think there's definitely people on one end of the spectrum that think that cows should have the same rights as we do. In other words, not to be held, well, I'm going to give examples, to be held captive, to be used in, that their sole purpose is for us to consume, to eat, or raise for leather or fur, that they have the right to not be murdered for that, right? So that's the one end of the spectrum, and I think when you hear the typical phrase animal rights, that's probably what we're discussing. I think tonight we're talking in a little more broader terms about how do we view animals, how should we treat animals. So maybe that's a loaded phrase, animal rights.
So I was going to say, the reason I raised the religious question earlier, which is there's a particular perspective of religious people that animals can be used for certain purposes. And I pulled the Catholic, I went to Catholic school, I pulled the catechism doctrine that says, what the Catholic Church's position is on animals. I don't necessarily find the religious view interesting only because in a philosophy sense, it's not falsifiable, meaning that at any point, somebody could simply say, well, God says we can do it this way. So really what I'm trying to get at is, what is the rational basis for extending rights? And there's a number of different, I think, interesting arguments along that path that help answer that question, what is rights? The first is the specious argument. It's basically the person that says, we're human, we can do whatever we want with them. The next is kind of the indirect perspective, which is really something like Immanuel Kant would say, where animals don't really have rights, but we should probably not treat them in a poor way because it has some effect on us as people. That's another, if you're thinking about this as a scale of where these things sit, that's kind of closer to the specious argument, but not on the full right side. And then there's direct, which says, yes, animals should have rights and we should consider them when we're making moral decisions. And then there's the equal rights camp, which says, look, there's nothing different between animals and us. They should have full rights and the same rights that we have. And so I think the big question is, which of these is right? And when we're talking about rights, which of these positions do we find compelling and correct?
I don't think those are the only positions.
No, I don't think so.
Well, I think it's important to just take a step back and think about, okay, so let's say we are going to grant, because we have the ability, because we're humans and we rule the world, to grant rights. We've granted rights to each other. In the last however many 100 years, we decided to grant rights to slaves and no longer allow slavery. We've granted rights to women because somehow they didn't have certain rights before, different from men, kind of thing. But if we go all the way back, if we are going to grant rights and we decide that animals have the same rights as we do, then are we going to keep a lion from eating a wildebeest because a wildebeest he's shaking his head back there, because a wildebeest has a right to live life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness kind of thing, and that's against nature. So if we think of ourselves as moral thinking animals, this is why we struggle with this concept, is what is a right? What do we extend? What do we have the right to extend, right? And determine anything at all. And part of it comes from what you were saying, right? Yes, we do rule the world. I'm going to side with him on this one because we can just drop a nuclear bomb and get rid of every ant on the planet. And ants don't, as far as we know right now, have the ability to do that. So
We have the power to destroy ourselves.
no, I'm saying we have the power. We could figure out if we wanted to how to get rid of every ant on the planet, if we wanted to. And I'm not sure.
Agree to disagree.
Well, we might kill ourselves in the process, but we could do that. we have the power to do that today. We could love the planet today if we wanted to, right? So I mean, we have that kind of dominion, if you will, at this point. And I'm not sure ants have that same, you know what I'm saying? So we do have the ability to determine who gets what rights. That's what we're discussing.
I'm sorry about that. You could,
Along that lines, I think rights is a vague and ambiguous term, and probably a better term, especially in a complicated situation where we have to maintain relationships with animals as to who gets eaten and who doesn't, would be respect. Indigenous cultures, the vast majority of them recognize that we all have to get along together, plants, animals, people, and they show respect in such a way as to not be greedy about it. If a Native American were to take a deer, he would lay down tobacco and say prayers. Same thing if he picked food or birds, and a lot of other indigenous groups do this. We go to the grocery store, we pull off a package of hamburger, we don't even think about the suffering that animal went through to provide us with that meat. So there's a disconnect. We can go about with animals in our society with more respect. If we really don't need to kill something, why kill it? If we do need to eat, that's one thing. And that's there to provide for you, but if you don't have to take it, treat it with respect.
so
I mean, we're not so far removed from the days before 10,000 years ago when we were just as much on the food palette as were other animals.
I think that the position that you're advocating for is something like this. Animals probably don't have rights, but we have a duty to them. And
Stewardship.
Yeah, so it's stewardship. And that duty is to cause the least amount of harm, however that's defined. Maybe it's pain, maybe it's something else, for the purposes of our uses. So if there is a less impactful use, then we have a moral obligation to.
We expect that out of ourselves, why not with animals?
But do we decide that as a group and then we call it rights, as in now we enforce these rules and, you know, in a court of law, right?
Yes.
What you do, and so I think that's where we arrive at the word rights, because not everybody agrees with you. Some people think they should just be able to shoot an elephant just to get the tusks.
Yeah, it was.
Or,
We should
you
be able to
know,
call
hang
our
the
herds
head
too.
on the wall. What's that?
We should be able to cull our herds and the stupid and the sickly.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
What we describe as respect and what we describe as duty merge as rights. They become rights as they are enacted.
Like
Like an
collectively.
organically derived right.
I think I would, just from my weird, like, perverted philosophy mind, I would disagree with that, only in the sense that rights, when we're talking about rights in philosophy, we're talking about something else. Meaning that rights are kind of inherent in the animal. So if we extend rights, we're really saying that the animal bears those. But I think what he's saying is that we have the obligation. So we have this obligation of stewardship that isn't inherent in the animal, but it's more inherent in not being a jerk and not causing more pain and not. So it seems a little different, I think, than what you're saying. Only to like if I'm assigning very strict definitions to these terms. Yes, I'm sorry.
Well, and I would disagree with your assessment of his position. You can correct me.
I could be completely wrong. Go for it.
Well, because I think the indigenous view is stewardship is a piece of it, but I think it's much greater than that. That other forms of life, that we're just a piece of it, all of it is sacred. So that's more of an equality viewpoint than I'm a dominion over everything and I have a duty and obligation and to take care of that. That's a piece of it, but I don't think that's the full indigenous view at all.
Yeah, so that might be a different statement. Then that's something that that's more of an indirect view, meaning that, or I'm sorry, that's more of a direct view, where you're saying we should recognize animals' rights. When we're making moral decisions, we should consider animals in those decisions. But the types of rights that they possess are somewhat different than the rights that we possess. Is that better?
Well, I
I guess.
I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, so don't hold me to it.
I think
Yeah,
she's
no.
saying it's way bigger than just one-way street. You know, is it this way or is it that way? There's an old Chinese, or an old proverb about the frog not drinking up the pond he lives in or something like that.
Yeah,
That's
that's
kind of
true.
the, tied to that, right? Is that there's an understanding that it is a finite resource too. That seems like
And I
the
think it's
critical way to
also,
say it, but that, right?
I think that also the Judeo-Christian view is we have dominion. We are more powerful, and as we see in the world, is that there's an arrogance, a sort of suicidal arrogance about things. So that you had said, why would you take something? Why would you take the life of an animal if it's beyond sustenance? Why would you do that? And then you get into the question, well, why has that happened? And then you get into the question of capitalism. Okay, because I can make a profit, and the more I can take. You look at the buffalo, for example, near extermination of the buffalo just for the hides. So that's rooted, I think, in a Judeo-Christian view of humankind's place in the world,
Absolutely.
and to our detriment and their detriment. So, but an indigenous view, that's why it was so abhorrent to Native Americans, because bison are equal spirits. They're equal in this world to us as humans.
Yeah, I think it's also the Hindu view, the Buddhist view. There is something unique about the Judeo-Christian perspective on dominion over animals, I think, in comparison to all. I'm sorry.
The flip side, just consider, is when we go down the path of thinking about what are animals' rights and other creatures, living entities' rights, it's pretty broad. It's hard to practically speak, put your hands around some of that and go in a lot of different directions. But an alternative kind of consistent with the Judeo-Christian foundation is to just think in terms of what are our rights with respect to animals. Because so it could be that in that point of view, we'll say there's some way in which we want to consider suffering, but once we eliminate suffering, then all bets are off. It's up for grabs what we really want. And that will be a virtuous moral outcome that is acceptable. So it's much simpler.
That's interesting.
Not that that's the objective here, but
You're making, I think what you're making is kind of like an application of riparian law. So riparian law is the idea that when you use a resource like water, you get certain uses as of right. And it sounds like what you're saying is maybe there's something that we recognize with animals in a similar manner, where
everything that you can see.
I have a,
Most of us
Oh, yeah,
make an
yeah.
argument, you know, as
Right.
we did our research a little bit, most of the arguments arrive at that conclusion at the
Okay,
end.
yeah.
Is if they're sentient beings, do they have the ability to, do they feel pain, and are we causing suffering? And we don't believe right now that when we cut down a corn stalk and eat corn, that plant is suffering, but we definitely understand that ape is
Yeah.
suffering,
Right. So an answer to the question would be, in going down the morally virtuous path, do we have an obligation to be aware of the life conditions that we're imposing on animals? So if chickens are raised with their beaks clipped off in a 10-inch cubic container so that they're more productive or whatever it is, should we be aware of that when we go into McDonald's or Texas Action? Absolutely, right. Yeah, but I mean, should that be a law? Or
Should they have to put video feeds of their slaughterhouses
Yeah.
live
However-
inside the restaurant?
But that, so I'm just curious because just to come back to this, it strikes me that the issue, in going down the path of do animals have rights, the question really is how does humankind attempt to strive to lead a virtuous life? And there's this conflict because something that we're doing that we gloss over, which we push down to animal rights activists to try to make a broad case on behalf of animals, is really quite straightforward from the point of view of virtue in everyday life, which is you don't do really bad things to anything.
Well, the answer-
And it doesn't, you know, you don't
What is
wreck
the
your backyard,
impact of-
you don't wreck your neighbor's house, you don't beat up your neighbor's kids, you know, you don't steal from people, you don't treat things in ways that almost any reasonable person that you can talk about would say is bad. But, you know, we're concerned about, you know, mistreatment of dogs in the city. You know, we have 1 billion chickens a year raised and killed. I mean, it is so preposterous that, you know, it's sort of hard to talk about it in terms of animals' rights because you do that, but it's just so horrendously bad in terms of acting human virtuous considerations often. So we should know better than that.
So-
To answer his question really quick, on the way that how how we define animal rights currently as is, and is through the government, is through our social contract that we, as a civil society, we can even want to take even this library, for instance, that is a public library that all of our taxpayer dollars have paid for. That if you look at this was a piece of land that could have been a habitat for whatever amount, a multitude of animals. That we elected officials to propose building a library, and these officials went and got studies to see what the effect would be on the surrounding habitats. We voted for this. We have villages to fund this. So what my point is that animal rights as is right now is a social convention that we all as voters, we vote in elections and we have positions, we can put forth ballots, we can put forth measures to say we want leash laws for our dogs all over the county, or we don't kill elephants. That doesn't really count for around here, but that's the way that the voting booth is how we define what morality is.
But I think he's saying that we need to decide what that is first. I mean, I think you're 3 steps ahead, that we collectively then say, okay, maybe we need to enact law so that we collectively agree on this. And we're still at a stage where we're not necessarily collectively agreeing, because I think it has been evolving. Like I said, you know, we came from a hunter-gatherer beginnings, right? I mean, we were hunters from the beginning. That's how we survived and ate. And that's still part of our legacy. And so now with that whole situation with chickens and, you know, 6 billion chickens are killed every year in this country for our consumption, and almost all of them are kept in cages where they can't even move around. We get away with that because not many people know that. They don't see it. We're completely separated from our food source. We're not out there with the bow and
The
arrow.
individual, someone that has a problem with that is not powerful in the collective. The government, if we're like when I talked about
Because
dominion
not
over,
enough people know about it.
well, no, when I talk about dominion over Earth, the reason people who have the dominion, it's us, but not me. It's the people. That's the if you're going to talk about the social contract is the coming together and producing those powers.
But that's irrespective, it's got nothing to do with virtue.
But ultimately,
just
That virtue is as good as the ballot that wins.
So-
You fight and argue and think to figure out what's just and unjust in life. That's the striving
And then-
of
But is it wrong to eat chicken? That's the question. That's where we're at right now, because
Not if
most,
it's, not if,
Yes,
not if
well,
it's strange and it depends on what.
because well, okay, but if you take out the knowledge of what people don't really understand is happening in the food industry, so we're going down that path about the food industry, right? But if we just ask the simple question, is it wrong to eat chicken? How do we decide that? I mean, we are omnivores, right? We're part of the animal world. Is it wrong for a lion to eat a wildebeest? Right? It's not morally wrong for a lion to eat a
It's a
wildebeest.
rational outcome.
So it's how we've come to have, just a second, please, how we have alternatives that has made us stop and think about this, because we have an alternative now. We can eat something besides a chicken for sustenance. We can survive without that anymore. There was a time when we couldn't survive without eating a chicken or something else. So now the question has come up, oh, now should we feel for the chicken? Does the chicken have its own agency and have its own life? Before, we probably never occurred to us care, really, because we were in survival mode. And we're somewhere still on that path of deciding what is virtuous when it comes to this exact topic, because we have to stuff something in our mouths pretty much every day to survive. That's why this is a difficult topic when it comes to, you know, eating meat and eating.
Jordan, you wanted to say something else.
Well, I've got some tremendously good news. So Casey and I formed a new corporation, and I tell you about it. So it's a remarkable business. So first of all, we've accumulated literally thousands of pigs, and we're raising them in this unbelievably humane environment. We're playing very white to them every night. We've got massaging them set up. We're oiling them down. It's a free-range kind of an environment. We have mood lighting. It's really incredible. But that's not the interesting part of the story. The interesting part of the story is that Casey and I, working together, created a new invention called the Assassinator. It's a machine. You can put a pig in it, push a button, and it instantly assassinates the pig. It feels nothing. Zero suffering. So the good news is that we got the Assassinator. The pigs don't know about the Assassinator, but they do know about the very white. They love hanging out there. We run them through the Assassinator at the end, at which point we barbecue them. It's incredible sauce. It's just incredible. And then we serve them to people who absolutely adore barbecue. Tremendous pleasure for this experience. We've eliminated everything about the factory farming process that you find normal. Have I improved the moral state of farming at all in America as a result of my corporation that Casey and I have created?
I think so. I think you just said exactly what I was going to say, much more colorful and entertaining. But I was going to say, is it wrong to eat chicken? It feels wrong to me, and I would have to take more time to defend the position, but it feels, my intuition says it's very wrong to induce suffering unnecessarily in chicken. But to end one life, to continue my own, to say it's okay to do it with plants but not animals because XYZ, immediately gets very complicated, and I could go at least for the simple case and say factory farming is terrible and it's immoral what we're doing with chickens in this country, and every time I eat a chicken that's been factory farmed, I'm doing something wrong. But also with capitalism, blah, 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 it's complicated,
So
crazy,
if you
and
were to
terrible.
shop your meat just from College Lindbergh Industries.
Yeah.
It's
Is it
very,
cheap?
oh, it's ridiculously efficient.
It's cheap,
And
pigs
it's
are so
very
happy.
white, it's unbelievable,
Yeah.
with its whole broadcast system and the mood lighting, and it's just fantastic. And we play these
That
movies,
pigs love.
pigs love it, and the Assassinator is just like that. And they don't know about the Assassinator. We don't take them all at once.
But you are not allowing them to live to the end of their natural life, so.
Well,
there
that's
is
true,
that
but they're going to the Assassinator. My question is just, have I solved all the problems of animal ethics? Have we resolved all of the moral problems associated with this?
I don't think so. If you're still controlling their environment.
I know it's making it much better. I mean, this is like,
Yeah,
it's not the way
sure.
you describe it, the wilderness.
The end of their natural life could be in the jaws of a wolf.
So awesome.
Let
This is
me
great.
give you an example of that.
They
So you
experience
can-
tremendous
you know what
pleasure. They
animals
experience
do for them to
tremendous
die?
pleasure their whole lives. Tremendous pleasure. You love it. I mean, it's just
I mean, cows in India have free will by comparison.
by comparison. Yeah.
And so, you know, they've taken their, so, I mean, that's the extension of that, I think, is do they have by rights, do we mean free will?
Well, I'm just really asking the question if I resolved
I
the moral
think
worries
I think the question you're asking is, are you a utilitarian or are you,
Well,
do you
I'm
believe in
just, I'm
rights?
asking a fairly simple question. Everybody hates factory
Doesn't
farming, I
it
get
feel
that.
better?
I just resolved the factory farming problem, created a corporation, some of the factory farming problem. Have I resolved the moral issue?
Yeah.
At this point, by virtue of resolving the factory
Well, the
farming.
moral issue in the big picture of morality as it stands as its own entity, or morality of this particular culture. Because
Actually,
we
I just wanna know
could
what-
take another example of that there was a time period when people thought it was perfectly acceptable to drag people from Africa over to the United States and feed them and clothe them and teach them to read English words on paper and civilize them. And now they have a much better life than they had in the jungles of Africa, right?
right?
That's true, although I'm doing the exact opposite in the case of my pigs. I'm actually making their life much more pleasant rather than imposing a kind of imperialistic conception of happiness and pleasure.
But
I
that
don't
was
think they
completely
actually have a cultural
acceptable
norm.
at the time as if that was a quote, better life, and you're telling me that you're giving the pigs a better life.
I think I am, yeah. Well,
But you're making a
It's-
big cultural assumption
Frankly-
there that pigs like berry white.
Well, you're suggesting that there's a culture of pigs that I'm somehow screwing up with. I don't know if anybody, so are you arguing that pigs have a kind of intercultural life,
Well,
sophisticated?
It's a silly argument because pigs have been domesticated
Well,
to the point where they're right.
let's get a
But-
silly argument then. So the more interesting argument might be the moral argument, which is, have I resolved the problem, the moral problem? Has Casey and I resolved the moral problem?
For some people who focus only on the
I'm more
issues that
interested in
we
whether
address.
it's true, not whether most people think it's true. Do you think it's true that we resolved the moral problem?
No.
What about, I think there's.
So what have I left unaddressed?
Why?
Coercion.
I think they don't have the free will anymore. I think they're still captive. I think they
Captures
are
their
not.
pleasure the way we are kind of in our culture, unfortunately. Yeah. So your worry is that if they don't live in a natural state, then I'll admit, our factory farm is exquisite factory farm. It's a really nice factory farm, but it's a factory farm, is very artificial. So I'm not going to dispute that at all. It's an incredibly artificial environment, very pleasurable, but incredibly artificial. So your argument, if I understand it correctly, and I don't know what words you're about, is that it's that the moral wrong that we're committing isn't so much that we're creating a life of pleasure, that's actually probably absolute good, but that we're taking the animals out of a natural state where they could be, in some sense, better.
I personally, yes, but
Distinguish that from the naturalistic fallacy.
I think so. Yeah, I think that you're taking them out of the natural order. You're still using them artificially for your own gain.
So the wrongness lies, so Casey and I, the moral
So
fault.
I think other people would like to
Well,
comment
so let
too.
me just follow this up. So the moral fault that Casey and I are making is that we're taking, despite the fact that it's very pleasurable, we have a very instrumental view towards animals. We're using them. We're not treating them as an ends, we're treating them as a means for our own desires. Fair. So the wrongness lies in the fact that that in your mind is that we're using animals for our own purposes, not that they're suffering.
I think that there could be some inherent suffering.
There's no suffering.
And
I
then-
guarantee you there's no suffering. It's very white, it's very loud, broadcast and wide, it's fantastic. The massages are incredible.
I'll just ask him one question, and I want to hear what their comments are.
Sure.
So it sounds like you're making one assumption that all pigs are the same as well. So some pigs might really dig berry white and the lights and the massage, but other pigs might not.
I'm
And
shocked.
we don't want to end up assuming that all
Well,
animals
I don't wanna
all
get
one
too hung up on
species
the
are
facts
alike
here.
either, because we don't like to assume that with human
I
beings.
like the thought experiment though, because, and I'll move on, but I just wanted to say something similar is happening, which is that I really like Impossible Burgers. Who knew? I also really like Beyond Meat's sausages. I've been replacing a lot of stuff in my diet these days. It makes an interesting moral, it presents an interesting moral question, which is that as these things replace factory farming, what do we do with these animals? All of a sudden, we're letting out large quantities of animals because ultimately they will.
They're not going to open the case and I'm afraid of that.
But it presents the same problem, which is that there seems to still be something morally wrong about letting animals back into the wild after the factory as well. But I don't know how to, yeah, go ahead. Yes, please.
This is kind of going on a different, it's probably what drew me to this conversation. About a week or so ago, and we see it all the time, there were two sentencings that went on. I believe it was in our area. I'm not going to get all the facts straight, but you'll get my point where I have this question angrily in Switzerland on this because I go both ways. But there was an animal abuse case, and that person got 9 years, and it was a sexual assault case. And I believe that person had a lot of things, and they bargained it down. And he ended up with like 3 years or something like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
And so, when I heard the word animal rights, it's like, that didn't feel right to me. Like, you know, I mean, I don't understand what happened, I don't have any facts, but I just wanted to throw that out there. I mean,
So-
So you're the attorney.
Divulged you were a lawyer.
And I feel obligated to answer it as a non-attorney to say, isn't your immediate assumption though that that's a problem with our judicial system more than that?
That's
Like,
true.
so-
Yeah,
Because
I will
you're
say that.
you're taking 2 cases out of tens of thousands of cases that are handled in the country every day, or whatever, and across the board, and there's so many parameters, if that's the right word, to try cases and, come to those ends.
And that's
I
kind
think
of why I wanted to
So
come
if
here
that
and
happened
mention it.
every single time, that's a whole different conversation.
Right.
If every single time there was a sexual abuse case and every single time they have, 9 years, 2 years or whatever, then we have a conversation. But I think what you're saying is,
Do you think that's
What-
unusual?
Well, yeah, I think it's somewhat unusual, but something that does happen every time is that, which I was interested to find out when I went to law school, animals are considered property. So I have a dog. My dog cost me $500 from Hands Rescue Agency. If you killed my dog, I would be upset, and I would try to do something about it. My dog's worth $500. There's no status value for my dog. There's nothing else beyond that. There's no emotional suffering, damages. There's just nothing else to it. That seems interesting from a legal perspective. It's probably not the subject of today, but
Right, I mean, this was a boarding
Yeah, maybe it is.
situation, the animals are suffering, I mean, we had all those issues. But I just.
yeah. Yes.
It seems like a lot of the conversation is focused around mammals and animals that we directly eat, and we have alternatives to eating animals, but if you extend it down to insects, which are also animals, well, we practice genocide.
We do,
with
yes.
insecticides, and we'd never be able to feed the population. We'd starve.
You're making an interesting point, because
Well as mosquitoes.
We now know cockroaches experience pain behavior. They exhibit pain behavior. And I actually wrote a paper once on cockroach pain behavior because it's an interesting subject. You're right, though. If you draw the line at, let's say, pain, all of a sudden you're down this rabbit hole that extends moral consideration to cockroaches, which
We
seems...
kill more animals producing food and vegetables than we can produce the correct things that we put on our plate.
And so I think that's why people draw a line right at sentience, right? So then they can grab onto something. Well, it's got to be a bigger animal with a bigger brain and one that I can look in the eye, and then I will give it some rights. So
Grasshoppers are pretty sentient.
I saw someone like
so
that.
this comes from an emotional place as much as a rational place.
In a world of dwindling resources and ever increasing pressures on coexisting, for a smart species, we seem to have been running our planet ragged. And I say the critical thinking that went into his operation, while it may not be perfect, is a good step in the right direction. And perhaps we could use this as a model, like Buddha said, for other people to do that. Perhaps we can get more farms to do free-range chickens. Perhaps we can have much more humane farms to raise pigs until we come up with a solution that everybody agrees with. Right now, we're still stuck in 17th and 18th century means of raising food. And 1996, the World Health Organization said, we've reached capacity for feeding every man, woman, and child on this planet. Here we are still stumbling around with old methods. So kudos to the critical thinking that went into this, and hopefully we can continue to evolve.
well, there's an interesting angle to what you were saying when you said 18th century, and made me think of this, and I was going to say earlier. The elephant in the room is that somebody said this is capitalism, right? Because when we look at healthy ways to raise chickens, it's actually healthier for us, right? So we would think, logically, that being thinking animals, that's what we would do. We would want to raise healthier chickens to have healthier food. But that's not what we do, right? Because it's all about how much money those farms can make. That's the bottom line, right?
It's really
How much it
about-
costs to buy it, how much to produce it, back to your pigs. Are your pigs really expensive? I bet they are, because Berry White
Yeah, you're right.
syndicated,
You're
it's gotta
absolutely right.
be.
And what's
Lots of
you're
licensing
absolutely
fees.
right, because reality is that I produce cheap chickens, I can't take it away, right? I mean, you make a very good point, that in order to have the farm that we've designed, you're gonna have to pay an extra $7 a pound for pork.
And you can only have so many pigs on that farm, where on the other
So limit what
farms,
we
we can
pull.
cram so many in and everything, right?
So
So
they-
it's a commodity, they're not even thinking of them as games that matter at that level.
Yeah. But I think that the issue that Jordan was had possibly resolved with his farm, because I don't know.
I saw your face when you. I did not invest in this.
Again, though, the question is, do animals have rights? And I still kind of come back to the position that in trying to act a virtuous, lead a virtuous life, or act in a virtuous manner, we decide things irrespective of what their rights are. They don't have rights. We decide what's the correct path, and resolve it and change it from time to time based on what we think is, from our perspective, is mainly about pain and suffering. And that could evolve someday to some sort of concept that they have free will and hence free range. And we can't kick them away like cows do. But I would say they don't have rights. That the issue is, what is our concept of what's the right thing to do, which is just like we decide what's the right thing to do with land, trees, the air, water, insects, etc., and animals are subspecies to humans are always going to be managed by humans, and we're going to do what we think is we have to get more sophisticated in going down the path of what's virtuous, just versus unjust, and have a dialogue about that, which we're having. But that's different than saying they have rights, because I think if you say animals have rights, then that opens up Pandora's box to go way beyond anything that's practically manageable.
Well, I think you touched on it earlier, and maybe you should repeat and explain it in a different way. When you said inherent rights versus rights that we bestow upon them, I think that's a really important distinction. In philosophy, we talk about truth with a capital T and truth with a lowercase t, and I think it's the same thing. But would you explain it again? What
So
you
the
said about
position that you're making, or the argument that you're making, is called the proud specious argument. It's, from what I can tell, started by a guy named Cohen at the University of Michigan. It's bioethics. Which is basically that, yeah, we're dominant, but we should probably think about this in ways in which we reduce pain. And then there's, from there, kind of the more Kantian argument, Immanuel Kant, that, animals don't have rights, but when we treat animals poorly, it kind of makes us bad people. It reflects poorly on us. I think that's what you're looking at.
Well,
It's not really an inherent rights argument. You're saying they don't have rights, and because they don't have inherent rights doesn't necessarily mean that we should just act with willful abandon. We should think about what we're doing and make sure that it reflects good on who we are as people, as opposed to.
Who's the philosopher that advocates for stewardship, that there's value in being both making money and also having a socially, there's also social value? What philosopher is that?
Social, I'm sorry.
What social value and also intrinsic value as money is, or value, they want to say it like that. I mean, I keep hearing about Immanuel Kant's moral imperatives, but what's the physical side? Where's the person advocating for stewardship for the sake of property, for the sake of making your kingdom better?
So are you saying who's the person that believes that there aren't rights and yet we should act in a good way? Or are you saying
No, that there are rights, that reality does exist, and that we have dominion over our reality, and we can make choices that we make choices based on, is there a good value to it, as in, is there money value or is there social value to it, or the combination of both? What is that philosopher?
I don't know the correct answer. I would say no. I don't think it's a brain. I think Ayn Rand would say do whatever you want with them.
No,
she's
I'm quoting exactly what she said.
Oh, it is. I'm not familiar with subjectivism. We don't really study that. I think the closest in modern philosophy would be maybe Peter Singer, but he takes a different approach. He says that yes, animals are useful, but we have to be considerate of pain as the primary decision as to whether or not our uses should be allowed morally.
But what is suffering then? Is suffering is negative value. When you look at suffering, that is a negative. That is if something costs, if you go to the store and it costs too much, that's suffering for your pocketbook. When an animal is in more pain than it should be, that is more suffering than you wish to make that choice for that animal. That's social value right there.
I think that's an interesting question because what level of analysis are you looking at suffering as well? If the animals are being caressed and listening to Barry White for 20 years and then in 30 seconds are killed with the, what was the name of it? Assassinator.
Well, I'll make a so the difference between my philosophy and I know Kant's philosophy, or objectivism, is that you look at the moral imperative that you tell someone on high is telling you we're not letting these animals suffer. Whether it's the Indian tribes that say we don't, or the Hindus that revere the cow, or whoever else that has qualms or whatever else. And if you take a look at the Western cultures and of people that are stewards of the environment, that go to the government, that run for office, that puts things, they do empirical research to say, yeah, we do these studies right here. We might not get it right, like we might skew one way or the other, but at least we're trying to bring in actual data. Like I said, with your senses and your thinking, you can come close to what the value is. Social value is a bit harder than physical value, but acting on Earth in reality is a lot better than that Kantian way of looking at it.
So your statement is that there is a way to assess the social value of animals, and animals deserve moral consideration, and in determining whether an action that we take is moral, we have to evaluate the value of
in the study of economics, it's called your willingness to pay.
Willingness to pay.
So that's about an easier way to look at it, and that's in philosophy.
So the answer might be
volition.
Richard Posner might be the person.
Well, it's a volition of rights. Like you're asking someone, you're validating someone's right.
Okay.
I'm saying like animals and humans, you're validating someone's right. Who's validating that? That's the question behind this entire premise right here. When you're asking, do animals have rights? Or who's giving those rights, and are they valid, or is the person above that valid?
Is there anyone that believes that there are inherent rights, not given rights? You do. And I'm sorry. Yeah. How far do you think those rights go? Do you think that is there anyone that believes that animals should have equal rights to humans?
What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't either. That's a good
Yeah.
question.
You only give rights if you have power, right? Can anyone argue against that?
Without going down a rabbit hole, yes. There are a number of ways that you could argue that there are rights that are inherent that are not dictated by power. That would be philosophy of law. Yes.
Are you thinking freedoms? Could you use the word freedom instead of right?
Yeah,
The
okay.
animals have the same freedoms that we have.
Yeah, do animals have the same, yes.
Well, I think that a distinction between humans and non-humans, not including insects necessarily, is that humans have the capacity, let's say a pig doesn't, to understand symbolism and to also think about memory and a future and to think about both of those. So a pig's never going to say, gee, I wish I were free. Like you were saying about, oh, they're suffering because they're not running wild in the woods or something. I don't think pigs have that capacity. And so that's hard to know personally. Well,
Yeah, I would
research
argue that
the
you don't
difference-
know that.
The difference in cognizance between pig and human is that a pig can't project into the future and say, I think I'm gonna eat twice as much because it's gonna be November and maybe I won't have as much to eat.
But a squirrel can do that.
You're doing.
What about a dolphin?
Okay,
Forget
how
a
about
pig.
those
Let's
things?
talk about a
Pig is
dolphin.
never gonna say, what's gonna be my best retirement option?
But
So-
that's a human construct, retirement's a human
Right,
construct.
and
so
that
we're-
is different. So that, I think it's this danger again of this arrogance of the human to say, we know it all and a pig doesn't. And
Well, that I agree.
Well, I mean, to say that we know what a pig, to say that it's anthropomorphizing, to say we're gonna project our view into a pig, but I don't think research has shown that out about there are cognizant differences
Or to
between
just to
a pig and a human. And our nearest genetic